Hello. To as many as we can. I'm Brian Patton. I'm a generalist at Quest Software, dealing a lot with Active Directory recovery and overall security. Today, we're going to be talking about ransomware, not just ransomware on your data, but really how it affects your directory and what you can do to help restore the event that it does happen to you. With me, I'm joined by two of my different colleagues, Mr. Brian Heimer and Matthew Vinton. Brian, you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Brian Heimer. I'm a solutions architect with Quest Software. I've been here for a long time, focused a lot in the last few years on Active Directory recovery, especially from ransomware attacks. And I'm sort of the subject matter expert in that here. So
Great. How about you, Matthew?
Right, my name is Matthew Vinton, and just like Brian, I am aligned to some of our largest customers here at Quest. And I've been working in the Active Directory recovery space for getting close to 9 years now. But for a lot of that time, it was pretty theoretical. In the last two, it's become a lot more practical. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today about what that means and what it's been like to have the rubber meet the proverbial road.
Yeah, all of us.
Well, I figure a good place to start. Let's talk about backups and air gap. We see so much different guidance. Even the White House even had recommendations last year in 2021 about air gapping your backups. Microsoft has that exact same guidance. Mr. Matthew Vinton, can you talk about what that means to you and what you advise our customers around air gapping backups?
Absolutely. So, regardless of what your Active Directory recovery strategy is against ransomware, again, this is when we talk about ransomware and Active Directory, we're talking about the meteor from orbit that wipes out like all of your domain controllers in a domain all at the same time. Recovery from that, there's a lot of different ways to recover from that. I suspect we're going to get into that today. But fundamentally, it seems kind of natural, but it's super important to have a backup available. If you don't have at least one backup of a domain controller per domain, you're obviously out of luck. So how do you protect backups? What we're seeing out in the field is that attackers are getting a lot more clever. So they're not only targeting domain controllers with the ransomware, but they're finding and targeting your backup infrastructure as well. So when we talk about air gapping, it's not technically air gapping. What we're talking about, though, is making sure that you have copies of backups that aren't located on systems that might be part of the blast radius of ransomware. And what that means in practicality, a lot of times that means making sure that your domain controller backups are in offsite tape storage, if you will. That can also mean they are replicated into dissimilar storage technologies. Very, very common one is Azure Blob Tech. But not to talk too much before this, but this is kind of one of my hobby horses right now. There's a little bit of a tension there because while it's really important to gap your backups to make certain that they're there, chain of custody with those backups is also critical. Mr. Patton, actually, I think it was one of your customers or someone else I heard that actually was a red team finding where there were backups that were sitting on a server that weren't they're basically just available. Long story short, regardless of what your air gapping strategy is, whether it's again leveraging tape and putting it into a offsite storage or replicating it, make certain that they're encrypted. Make certain that the keys are there just for directory services, because if someone can get a hold of those backups, then they can own your network. So I'll get off that hobby horse now.
Yeah, Matthew, that's a really good point. So encrypting the backups, obviously, if you get hit with ransomware, your backups are going to get encrypted. That's kind of what you don't want to have happen, right? But there is a thing that we call password protecting your backups, which means that you've encrypted them and you know how to unencrypt them. That's a very important point because a DIT file sitting out in the open is a really nice target for a hacker. It's very easy to hack an NTDS database and get the data that you want to be able to own the environment. So yeah, you want to make sure that those backups are secured either in tier 0 and or encrypted. That's a very important piece. For me, air gapping means separating those backups from the network. However you do that is a good question. Azure Blob Storage is certainly a great way. There's other cloud solutions that do that. What we've seen in advanced attacks is the attackers are going to take the time to learn where your backups go and try and go delete them before they drop ransomware. Microsoft calls this human-operated ransomware. It's an advanced threat tactic. The last client we worked with for recovery, the perpetrators were there for 5 months before they dropped ransomware. That's the indicators they have is when the network was breached. So yeah, you need to make sure those backups are somewhere where they can't be reached on the network. And that might even be copying them to a USB drive and sticking them in the front drawer of your desk. I'm not kidding. I've seen big companies do that. So.
And Brian, just because I know you're a very seasoned veteran at Quest, we had a question from Anil. What is Quest's relationship to Microsoft? Can you kind of talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, we're a gold partner with Microsoft. So our solutions, the Microsoft actually likes us a great deal. Our solutions help both in the Azure space and in the on-prem space. Quest has several business units. Our Microsoft platform business unit is the largest at Quest. And we've enjoyed that gold partnership for a long time.
And Brianna asked, what shifts have you seen in ransomware attacks in the pandemic era, and how has that changed recovery tactics? You want to take that one, Brian?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So I think the biggest thing is, with everyone working from home, being able to secure your environment across an unprotected network becomes really important. So zero trust becomes really important. I know a lot of companies scrambled to implement zero trust. A lot of them were trying to just beef up their VPNs and allow people to VPN in. Multi-factor authentication is really important. That core network on your corporate network is still just as vulnerable if a lot of people are VPNing in and you're not securing those VPNs better. So MFA is really important. As far as ransomware, I don't know that we've really seen a change. There has been an uptick. I mean, we all saw Colonial Pipeline. We've heard about the meat processing here in the U.S. Just recently, we heard about, what was it, Shutterfly? Shutterfly just had an attack.
Yep.
There has been an increase, I think, in attacks. Prices have gone up. If you're going to pay the ransom, it's usually millions of dollars now. Targets are getting a lot tastier, and attackers are getting a lot bolder. That's probably the main things that I've seen. You really have to make sure that your environment is secure. But again, air gapping your backups is a big piece of it. And we're going to talk about more things that you should be doing to prepare for a ransomware attack.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Brian. Just to add to that one a little bit, when it comes to recovery tactics, one of the things that we are seeing is, of course, it's not just normal employees that are all working remotely. It's IT employees that are working remotely, and that can complicate things as far as making sure that you're really thinking through how you get access to backups, how you get access to systems. So basically, yeah, if you need to spend a lot of time on site in order to execute your recovery, you have to think, is that going to be possible? Are you going to be able to bring the right people together in order to do that safely? So we're definitely seeing some evolution in that.
Yeah, communication is key, and you can't rely on your internal communication to do the work.
Yes,
very important.
And Dennis asked, in the work from home era, how can workers best protect themselves and the data? And as far as the directory restoration, because I mean, that's what we're really talking about today, is the directory. I think we already kind of alluded to some of the stuff with the air gapping, the different backups, being able to withstand the ransomware attacks, the Azure Blob Storage, having some kind of infrastructure where you can be resilient and withstand it to protect your different backups. Any other thoughts on this question?
Yeah, our solution base is really around on-premises Active Directory. Obviously, there's Azure Active Directory to worry about as well, and we have solution spaces there. Making sure that your employees are, like I said in the previous question, using multi-factor authentication to get to resources is probably the best way. Obviously, you want to password protect and or air gap your backups as well. Having multiple copies of backups is also very smart. If I have a large corporation and I have multiple data centers, as far as Active Directory goes, I would want to make sure that I have a full copy of my Active Directory, all domains in each data center. And if I'm going to put those in the cloud, I have a full copy in the cloud. So,
well, I'm thinking about order of operations as well. There's the directory, but one key thing comes before the directory, and that's typically DNS. So, how often do you have to deal with like external DNS, or are there any differences that you have to deal with internal AD DNS that you should consider? Matthew, you want to take that one?
Sure. So, okay. When it comes to DNS, absolutely. It is kind of course, past just passing packets network-wise. It is, one of the more fundamental elements of bringing your overall environment back up. And specifically, again, when we think about to your point, the order of operations, the key thing with Active Directory is it and DNS are both really linchpins in order to be able to restore normal business functionality. Like everyone is going to be waiting on, okay, network that's unlikely to be affected by ransomware. DNS could be, Active Directory could be, and all of those have to be working for most line of business applications to be back up, which is what people are really looking to do. But specifically with DNS, overall, I'm seeing with my customers, again, I work with mostly large customers. A lot of them are moving towards appliance-based DNS. It seems to be working okay. Frankly, I'm seeing a movement away from Active Directory integrated DNS. If you are still using Active Directory integrated DNS, it's not a problem. It can certainly be recovered. However, it can definitely complicate things. Specifically, you really need to have an understanding of how DNS and Active Directory in your environment interplay together in order to have a good testable recovery strategy, which I expect we're going to talk about like best practices around testing a little bit later. But like that's really critical, particularly if you've moved to an appliance-based DNS where you're in your recovery environments, you might not be able to fully test what that looks like in the event of an actual ransomware attack.
Now, another common question I'm often asked is, okay, I have a backup of my Active Directory. I do the restoration. Brian, your example earlier, the attacker was out there for 5 months. How can I do the restore and just not get reinfected based upon that? What are your methods or thoughts around doing a restoration so you can't just get immediately reinfected?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Brian, because it's something that natively is very, very hard to do. Essentially, you need to, if you don't have a solution, and I don't know who might have a solution you'd want to look at, but if you don't have a solution and you're doing this natively, you'd want to, when you do your recovery, before you bring your servers back into normal mode, say you're in directory services restore mode, you'd want to go out to Sysvol and you'd want to peruse Sysvol for any executables and either wipe them out or validate that they're okay. A lot of people use Sysvol. They use scripts. They use logon scripts. They might have binary files that run there. Those are where infection could get you reinfected the quickest. That's not the only places though, because if you're doing a system state recovery, you've got all of the Windows directory and you've got all of the program files directory and you've got your boot sector and you've got a lot of places that you'd need to worry about if you think the malware is actually running on your DCs. So there are solutions out there that can keep you from having to worry about the Windows directory or the program files directory or your boot sector or any other directory on the drives. Bare metal recoveries become very hard. Make sure you've got the latest signature file for your antivirus solution and be running it. A client that we worked with last April, they hardened a server before they gave it to us to do recovery. And they put new antivirus on it with the latest signature files and a management server that it was talking to, a new endpoint detection and response software, again, with a management server that it was talking to. Then they did some STIGs hardening, and then they handed that server to us to recover to. And I think that's all important. I think we talked about this maybe a little bit later, but speed of recovery is not necessarily the only factor. Everybody wants to know how quick can you get the environment back up. Yes, it's important to get back up fast, and certainly it's a lot faster than manual. But getting it done right the first time is really important, and getting it done in a way that you don't get reinfected is also very important. So I hope that helps.
We had a question from Frank. Can you talk about testing best practices for recovery? So Matthew, I know you work with some pretty large customers. Can you talk about how often most customers are doing testing of their AD recovery and what that entails?
Yes. So, again, I don't tell them this, but when I talk with customers and they kind of tell me about their testing strategies, I kind of internally sort of classify it into, S, A, B, and C tiers. And those that are doing a really good job, in my estimation, are testing either once a quarter or once every half year, once every 6 months.
Yeah, I would say that's good too.
But can you elaborate? What are they testing and what should they be testing?
Thank you. So when it comes to testing Active Directory recovery, you want to be realistic. So, in the past, you may have done well, what we'll do is we'll just grab an Active Directory backup, maybe using system state or something like that. And then, we'll make a change to Active Directory and then we'll restore that. That's not realistic anymore. That's not what you should be testing. Testing now, because of the prevalence of ransomware, because of the threat of losing everything, you need to have basically non-bootable DCs. You need to delete your domain controllers in your test environment. You need to be able to restore those completely from the ground up from a backup and understand what that is. Mm-hmm. And in your environment, if you have a complex production environment, don't use a simplified testing, test environment for your recovery. It needs to look like that. And what I mean by that is a lot of production environments have multiple domains. Maybe they've got, maybe there's still FRS hanging out there. Basically, you're going to want to test, if you can, actual production data for your recovery. Like those two things, both the cadence of testing as well as what you test, again, ground up, and what data you're using, those are like the three ingredients to a really successful testing strategy. And if you can get those, it can put you so far ahead in an actual ransomware incident.
Yeah, if you're not starting from where everything is gone, right, then you're not starting from the right spot. You have to assume that everything is gone. So again, protecting your backups becomes very important because you have to at least assume you have backups. So air gapping those backups and protecting them is very important. But the rest of the environment, if you're assuming that pieces will be there, a lot of my clients still believe ransomware or the domain controllers are still going to be around. Cyber attacks are not like physical disasters. They affect you globally. A client that I was working with, 17 DCs around the world, all of them were encrypted. They were all gone. So you've got to start from that premise. I don't have anything but this backup file. And how do I start? Standing up new servers. Maybe you've got to stand up new VM hosts to start with. You've got to get, like we said earlier, DNS stood up because Active Directory relies on DNS. So you have to get those things stood up first, and then you can start worrying about forced recovery. So
and how many people, how often do you think it should happen? I know, Brian, you talk about PCI. It's supposed to be done on an annual basis for different things. Mm-hmm. My personal gut feel is just probably done quarterly with different people if you've never done it before, until you get some good muscle memory out there, and then maybe back off a little bit.
Right. Build a plan, build your team, build a plan, test your plan, revise your plan, wash, rinse, and repeat. And remember, communications cannot be through something rely on Active Directory. It has to be through something else. So I know I have, with the team that we have here that helps when our clients get a ransomware attack and need help, we have our phones set up, and we have Signal set up on our phones so that we can be communicated with even if everything else is gone. Right? I don't rely on my internal email. These people are VIPs on my phone, and they can contact me whenever they want to. So waking me up might be hard, but
just to add on to that, like what I've seen, and again, like I'm a technical person, so to me, it's like, okay, all the technical problems are solvable. There's great software out there that can really help with that. But where I'm finding a lot of the challenges in like the people area, and it's not just communication, although that's incredibly important. It's also like decision making trees. Like, it might take, you might be able to fully recover from backup Active Directory in, an hour, technically speaking, but it might take far longer than that to actually make the decision to do so, to understand the problem, to have that go through the chain to get the OKs. And that's a really important part about testing as well, is like, hey, like, what's my process here? And specifically, not only that, but you can't assume that what you're doing is in a vacuum, because you're going to have like, the SAP team and the HRM systems, all these things, they're going to be knocking at your door. Like, how do you communicate with them? So all of those things are like really important for like a really cohesive and encompassing recovery strategy and testing.
Yeah, totally true, Matthew. It's so important to identify key domain controllers and get those DCs up and working, so that your application and database and file system teams, they can all start doing their recovery, because they can't really start that if they don't have Active Directory. So get those done, those key DCs. Let your team start their recovery, and while that's going on, you can work on your remote DCs, your ancillary DCs that aren't nearly as important.
We have another question, Matthew. We'll do this one quickly because Farhad's asking, can you explain your product offerings? So you can give just like a Cliff's Notes version, because I don't want this to be a sales pitch whatsoever.
Absolutely. So to kind of call back to what Brian Heimer was talking about earlier around like how you can technically recover AD. Essentially, what Quest offers is a solution that allows you to just back up Active Directory. And when I say just Active Directory, I mean the DIP file, sysvol, and a chunk of the registry, and be able to restore that and only that on a brand new system, and have that become your new domain controller. That vastly simplifies how recovery works. We can actually restore multiple DCs at the same time that way, but that's what we offer, is lean, mean, focused on Active Directory disaster recovery recovery solution.
Right, and we're doing things in that solution that help restore, or not only restore, but protect those backups, whether you want to protect those on-prem, or if you want to use something like Azure Blob Storage. You can set up Azure Blob Storage with what's called an immutability switch. And then from Recovery Manager, we can push backups into that storage. And that way they can't be tampered with afterwards. So big sell there.
Now, I know a lot of customers deal with BMR. So why would you still want to be able to do BMR? Why wouldn't you want to do BMR?
Hopefully you don't want to do BMR.
Well, sometimes
we do.
Right?
Yeah, I think you do. There are scenarios. Most of the time, it's because you have a multi-use DC, right? You're using it as a DHCP server or a certificate authority or DNS for non-AD integrated DNS zones. Maybe you've got a Unix farm and you put a zone on a primary zone on your DC, even though it's not integrated into Active Directory. Those are reasons I've seen people lean on bare metal. But for the most part, I would say that's not the smartest way to go, at least with our solution.
I agree. And just to add on to that, probably the most common reason amongst my customers, when we say BMR, we're talking about restoring the whole operating system, every bit.
Every volume that has something to do with Active Directory.
Exactly. The main reason like some of my customers do it is because they're not confident that they could actually like do a clean install of an operating system on physical systems in the event of a disaster. They were like, hey, we want to lean on like that because our like build process, we feel like it's probably going to be broken, and they don't have the ability to quickly sort of spin up new systems. But yeah, generally, what we call clean OS recovery is where you want to be if you can.
Yeah. That makes recovery to the cloud a lot nicer too. There's infrastructure you can use in the cloud and restore to there. That's something our solution supports as well. So those are good. Hey, one thing I wanted to bring up when we were talking about best practices earlier, sponsorship. You need to identify somebody within your company that has the authority to pull the trigger and say, okay, we need to do Active Directory recovery. I can't tell you the number of clients I've had that will limp along with a broken Active Directory because some things are still working and nobody wants to take the guts, has the guts to take that stand and say, okay, we're going to shut everything down so we can do a full recovery. That needs to be identified ahead of time, and that person needs to be given the authority to make that decision. So whether that's a CISO or a CIO or a data center director or an Active Directory manager, that has to happen. You need to identify that ahead of time.
So do either of y'all see, customers having regular RTO in Active Directory even defined? Is that a common thing?
Yeah, it is pretty common, just because at a business level, everybody wants to place that statement. It becomes a lot harder to do that when ransomware hits, because it's not like recovering a few objects in AD, right? It's not like somebody deleted an OU by mistake.
Well, I see, Matthew, you shook your head no.
Yeah.
I'm thinking you don't see it for AD, but you probably see it for other processes. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair. I just don't see it for Active Directory. I think that as again, as you get through the up the maturity curve, people are realizing what a complex type of thing we're slapping a label of an hour time period just isn't realistic. Like, that's just going to go flat out the window when you get hit by ransomware. So yeah, no, I've got like one customer I've worked with that had one, and it was like extremely generous recovery time objective that I felt was kind of meaningless. Most of them don't.
And I agree with you, Matthew. I think it is somewhat meaningless, although the business is still going to do it, right? It is going to fly out the window when you really get hit with ransomware, because all cards are on the table.
All right. This next question I think will be good for Mr. Heimer. Is there best practice regarding guidance from Microsoft or industry guidelines, or any recommendations? And I'm thinking about like the old white paper of how to restore your forest that started back in 2007 or so for schema corruption, but I know things have changed a little bit since then. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, that document's actually been updated several times. So just go Google planning for Active Directory forest recovery. And it used to be a PDF document. Now it's on a website inside of Microsoft that if you were to print it out, it's probably over 100 pages long. I handed it to one client that we were doing a white paper with, Active Directory expert, and he got back with me 2 or 3 days later and said, listen, I've got 15 tabs open to sub parts of this article. I'm completely lost. I don't know where I am anymore. But that's the document that Microsoft has. I actually had another person that used to work for Microsoft on the AD team tell me privately, I'm very sorry that this is what we built. So it's true. It's a very, very arduous task. And that's why you have to plan it. You have to test it. And you have to repeat that testing. You have to be able to do it. So, and that's why solutions like what we have exist, because we take that pain away. So.
And I had another question. Dreambug said, all my files sadly turned to MIAA files. How can I fix this? And that's actually sounds like something maybe bad happening in your environment. And keep in mind, we're talking about doing the recovery. That seems like that may be more of a response issue where something may be affecting your environment. So I would definitely talk to somebody else about that. I'm not sure if we can really help you out there. And I know we're running a little bit low on time, so I definitely appreciate everybody's time today. One last thing for Mr. Heimer, if you can do it really quickly. Why is it so important to recover in phases?
Oh yeah, phases are great. I did talk about that a little earlier. Recovery in phases allows you to focus on what's important first, get your skeletal infrastructure up so that your application teams and your database teams and your file system teams, they can all start their recovery. Again, Active Directory it's just one stone in what needs to be recovered, but I kind of consider it the keystone, right? If I don't have AD, then I don't have access to those databases and applications and file systems. So I've got to get Active Directory up and running, but that doesn't necessarily mean I need my DCs and my remote locations up and running right away. Get the data centers up, let them get their work done, work on your remote DCs while they're doing their upgrades or their recovery.
And thank you all for joining us today. Please be sure to leave your feedback in the chat and head to the link below for what's coming next. Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.